Gary Burghoff was an absolute delight. He brought that great charm to Radar. The teddy bear, cuddliness, the naivete. I'm having a tough time talking now.
While Radar O'Reilly was depicted as the sweetest character on American television, the man who played him made his castmates absolutely miserable every single day on set. But it wasn't surface-level annoyance. It was as bad as Wayne Rogers getting so fed up that he threw an actual chair at him. So how does the most lovable guy on the most beloved show in television history become someone his own castmates could not stand? And what was Gary doing behind the scenes that pushed professional actors to the point of throwing furniture? Join us as we expose the real story that the MASH cast buried for decades. The show that changed television. It is basically impossible to exaggerate how massive MASH actually was. The show ran for 11 seasons on CBS from 1972 to 1983, which means the comedy about the Korean War lasted 8 years longer than the actual war did. The episodes followed the doctors and nurses at a mobile army surgical hospital right near the front lines, mixing jokes with genuinely depressing drama. No television show before it had really figured out how to balance comedy and tragedy like that. It was funny, sad, and occasionally brutal, and audiences absolutely loved it. The finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired in February 1983 and drew an audience of over 106 million viewers, making it the most watched single television broadcast in American history at that time. That record held for decades. The show was not just popular, it was a genuine cultural institution, and the cast that audiences fell in love with became some of the most recognizable faces on television. The cast was completely packed with talent. Alan Alda played the sarcastic, preachy Hawkeye Pierce, and easily took over as the main star of the whole show. Wayne Rogers was Trapper John, the best friend who helped Hawkeye cause absolute chaos. McLean Stevenson played the goofy commanding officer, Colonel Henry Blake. Loretta Swit was the intense Major Margaret Houlihan. Larry Linville played the incredibly annoying Frank Burns. And Jamie Farr was the cross-dressing Corporal Klinger. Every single one of them was essential to making the show work. Gary Burghoff played Corporal Radar O'Reilly, the naive company clerk who magically knew about incoming helicopters before anyone else and slept with a teddy bear. Burghoff was the only actor from the original 1970 movie to join the TV show as a regular cast member. That gave him a weird sense of ownership and seniority over the character that nobody else on set could touch. While that might sound like a tiny detail, it ended up causing major friction behind the scenes as the show went on. The moment the show became a massive hit, the pressure of that success began to turn what should have been a dream job into something considerably more complicated. Wayne Rogers and the growing tension. Wayne Rogers was a good actor who came into MASH with real credentials and a genuine belief that Trapper John would be a co-lead role with serious creative weight behind it. The early seasons supported that belief. Trapper and Hawkeye were positioned as equals, two brilliant and irreverent surgeons pushing back against the absurdity of war together. Rogers brought charm and physicality to the role, and the chemistry between him and Alan Alda was genuinely electric in the show's first couple of seasons. The problem was that the show slowly and steadily began revolving more and more around Hawkeye and, correspondingly, around Alan Alda. Alda was not just performing the role, he was increasingly writing episodes, directing and shaping the series' overall creative direction. Rogers' manager later told the press that there was no need for Wayne to subject himself any longer to that nonsense. A quote that told the whole story without needing to specify exactly what the nonsense was. Rogers left after season 3, and the circumstances of his departure were messy. He did not sign his contract for the new season, which left him in a legally complicated position about whether he even had to show up to work. The producers were furious. The other cast members were caught in the middle. And Trapper John, one of the most popular characters in the show's early run, was written out with almost no ceremony, disappearing overnight while Hawkeye slept through his farewell. But here is the part that gets overlooked when people talk about Wayne Rogers leaving MASH. The frustration with Alan Alda taking over the spotlight was real, but it was not the only thing eating at Rogers during his time on the show. Sources from the production period have claimed that his relationship with Gary Burghoff was a separate and significant source of tension, one that contributed to making the whole experience feel less rewarding than it should have been. And the specific nature of that tension pointed to something unusual about how Gary Burghoff operated on that set. The chair-throwing incident that Rogers is most infamous for was not a random explosion, but the result of a very specific kind of frustration that had been building for a long time: action and reaction. The most dramatic documented moment in the Rogers-Burghoff relationship is The Chair, a 1983 biography of Alan Alda by Raymond Straight alleged that, during production, Wayne Rogers became so angry at Gary Burghoff in a confrontation that he physically threw a chair at him. That is a significant escalation from a typical set of disagreements, and the fact that it made it into a published biography suggests it was not a minor incident that everyone quietly forgot about. What actually caused that level of frustration has been pieced together from multiple accounts over the years. Gary Burghoff had a way of operating on set that drove certain cast members absolutely crazy. A 1983 TV guide piece on MASH, published after the show ended, included an anonymous quote from a cast member that described Gary as someone who always felt there was a conspiracy against him. The same quote described him as rude to everyone, but prone to tantrums if anyone responded in kind. The grievance that generated the most friction was Gary's attitude about his status on the show. Because he was the only actor who had played the character in both the film and the series, he carried a sense of seniority and creative ownership over Radar that other cast members found grating. Sources who worked on the show have claimed that Gary would sometimes make comments or take positions on set that implied he had more authority or more history with the material than anyone else, and that this dynamic played out in ways both large and small across multiple seasons. For Wayne Rogers, who was already dealing with the frustration of watching his co-lead role slowly shrink, having a castmate behaving with a sense of superiority on top of everything else was the combination that proved too much to tolerate quietly. People close to the production have suggested the chair incident was the result of a specific confrontation over a scene or creative decision, in which Gary's manner crossed a line Rogers had apparently been getting closer to for some time. The chair went across the room. Gary looked genuinely surprised by it, which some accounts describe as revealing in itself. And Wayne Rogers was far from the only person on that set struggling with the same issue. McLean Stevenson, Larry Linville, and the broader picture. McLean Stevenson played Colonel Henry Blake, and he was easily one of the most blunt cast members when talking about his time on the show after he quit. He walked away after season 3 because he was sick of living in Alan Alda's shadow. He immediately tried to launch a solo career, which completely flopped and never reached the success he expected. However, during a revealing interview about his time on the set, he said something that perfectly explained the entire issue with Gary Burghoff. Stevenson told the press that he got along with all of his MASH castmates except for one. He described his relationship with Gary Burghoff as a love-hate dynamic, and he was explicit that Burghoff was a brilliant actor who did the best job of anyone in the ensemble. The praise was genuine, and the frustration was apparently equally genuine. Stevenson admitted that his own ego had sometimes been part of the problem. which is a remarkably honest thing to say about a difficult professional relationship, but he did not let Gary entirely off the hook either. Larry Linville played the annoying and cowardly Frank Burns, and he was another cast member who could not stand dealing with Gary. Linville stayed on the show through season 6 before finally quitting. Stories from that time show he found Gary's behavior on set incredibly difficult to handle. Insiders claim Linville kept his frustration more private than the other actors who quit, but the misery was just as real. The pattern here is obvious. This was not just a case of Wayne Rogers clashing with Gary Burghoff. Multiple veteran actors across several seasons all had the same complaints about working with him. The most telling part of the whole situation did not come from the co-stars who hated dealing with Gary. It came from Gary himself when he finally found out what everyone really thought of him. Because what Gary Burghoff said when he found out his castmates had been quietly miserable around him is one of the most genuinely heartbreaking parts of the whole story. What Gary said when he found out. The TV Guide piece from 1983 that published The Loved Radar hated Burghoff, quote, did not stay quiet for long. Gary eventually became aware of what his former colleagues had said about him, and his reaction upon learning was not defensiveness or anger. It was something considerably sadder. By multiple accounts, Gary said that hearing this had genuinely upset him, not because he felt it was unfair, but because he had never fully realized how the people around him had experienced his presence on that set. He said that maybe he could have handled some things differently, which is the kind of understated admission that carries a lot of weight when the behavior being described involved a chair being thrown at someone and an entire cast anonymously agreeing that they loved the character and could not stand the actor. Mike Farrell, who played B.J. Honeycutt and who stayed with the show until its finale, once told Gary directly that his problem was that he could dish it out, but could not take it. Gary's response to that observation was to say that he was getting really sick and tired of dishing it out, apparently not realizing what he had just revealed about himself. Insiders who actually know Gary claim the MASH years left him with a lot of baggage that took decades to unpack. Sources say he cared way too much about the show and was obsessed with playing his character perfectly. The main problem was that he could not separate his artistic passion from just being a jerk to the people around him. The very intensity that made him a great actor was also the quality that made him completely exhausting to deal with on set. Gary quit MASH after season 7, claiming he was burned out and wanted to hang out with his family. Jamie Farr told him he was making a massive mistake. Mike Farrell explicitly warned him that the actors who had quit the show earlier ended up as cautionary tales rather than big successes. Gary left anyway. He came back for a quick 2-part farewell episode in season 8, and then he walked away for good. The exhaustion was a real factor. However, insiders from that time say the broken relationships with the rest of the cast were a major reason he had to escape. Walking away from a massive television paycheck because an actor thinks the entertainment industry cares about artistic integrity is a spectacular way to learn that Hollywood forgets people faster than a bad dream. And what happened to Gary Burghoff after MASH is a story that the Loved Radar hated Burghoff crowd probably never anticipated, because it turned out to be genuinely moving. Life after the long, quiet chapter. Gary Burghoff left MASH as one of the most beloved television actors in America, and spent the decades that followed in a quiet private life that most of his fans knew almost nothing about. The acting career did not relaunch as he might have hoped. He appeared on game shows, made occasional guest appearances, and struggled with the typecast problem that Mike Farrell had warned him about. Radar O'Reilly was so specific and so fully realized as a character that audiences found it genuinely hard to see Gary as anyone else. There were personal difficulties during the post-MASH years as well. Gary had been through marital problems during the show's later seasons, which, by some accounts, contributed to the burnout he cited as his reason for leaving. He went through multiple marriages and periods of personal turbulence that he kept largely out of the public eye, living in Connecticut and later in Florida, and eventually developing a second passion that most people who knew him only as Radar would never have predicted. Gary became a serious landscape painter and, by several accounts, a genuinely good one. He also developed an interest in inventing, producing a fishing lure design that he patented and considered one of his real achievements outside acting. These are not the headlines of a man who handled his departure from the spotlight badly. They are the details of someone who found a way to build a satisfying life after the version the public had watched. People who have spent time with Gary in his later years describe someone who is reflective about the MASH years, but not bitter, and who now understands, in ways he could not see at the time, why the relationships on set broke down the way they did. At the 2019 MASH reunion assembled for Alan Alda's podcast, the surviving cast members came together, and the warmth between them was described by everyone present as genuine. Gary does not fly, which complicates reunion appearances, but accounts from people who have remained in contact with him suggest that the hard edges of the old conflicts have softened considerably over time. Loretta Swit told an interviewer in 2018 that she had joyous memories with Gary and missed him. That is a very different sentence from loved Radar, hated Burghoff. But the most important part of the whole story might be what the Wayne Rogers chair incident and the TV guide quotes actually reveal about what that set was really like, because the pressure inside MASH was unlike almost anything else in television history. What the feud really tells us about MASH. Here is what gets lost when people focus on Gary Burghoff's personality story. That set was under extraordinary pressure from the very beginning. MASH became a massive hit almost immediately, which meant every person on it was suddenly carrying the weight of enormous public expectations while trying to do a creative job that required real vulnerability and real collaboration. The show was emotionally demanding in a way that most television productions are not, because the material it dealt with, death, trauma, and dark humor as a survival mechanism, asked things of its cast that a standard sitcom would never require. Alan Alda was the center of gravity of the whole operation, and that fact created real friction for everyone else in the ensemble, regardless of how they felt about Gary. Wayne Rogers felt it. McLean Stevenson felt it so strongly that he left the show despite it being the biggest career opportunity he would ever have. Larry Gelbart, the creator of MASH for television, also walked away after season 4, which suggests how intense the production environment had become by that point. Gary Burghoff walked into that already stressful environment with one massive advantage over everyone else on set. He was the only regular actor from the original movie. He also brought an attitude that made difficult situations much worse instead of better. People still debate whether he was a villain, a victim of circumstance, or just a complicated guy trying his best in a brutal workplace. Wayne Rogers clearly thought Gary was the problem. On the other hand, Mike Farrell praised Gary as the best actor in the whole cast, taking a much more generous view of the situation. The drama on the MASH set was not just about Gary Burghoff being a nightmare to deal with. It was about what happens when talented people are trapped together under immense pressure, while the studio constantly ranks them against one another. In that kind of environment, someone is always going to become the target for everyone else's anger. For a huge part of the show's run, Gary was that target. The chair Wayne Rogers threw across the room was not actually about Gary as a person. It was about months of built-up rage inside one of the most exhausting television productions in history. Radar O'Reilly, the sweet kid holding the teddy bear, was just the perfect lightning rod for the chaos. So, was Gary Burghoff genuinely difficult to work with? Or was Wayne Rogers just not built for the pressure that MASH put on everyone in that cast? And does the beloved, hated Burghoff quote tell the whole story, or only half of it? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.